I think that's so well put. It is a very strange time in British politics. Maybe that's why Mr. Charles Windsor looked so bored. The government is losing its mind at the prospect of vast numbers of people marching for Palestinian rights and a ceasefire in London this Saturday. But after reportedly coming under pressure from ministers to ban the march, the Metropolitan Police Service posted this statement on social media. The risk of violence and disorder linked to breakaway groups is growing. This is of concern ahead of a significant and busy weekend in the capital. Our message to organisers is clear. Please, we ask you to urgently reconsider. It is not appropriate to hold any protests in London this weekend. It's frankly bizarre to see the police claiming the right to decide what is and is not appropriate, and almost certainly an overreach of their powers. After all, their job is to uphold the law, not tell people what is tasteful. This isn't Iran, and they aren't the morality police, at least not yet. But that post may reflect the kind of pressure they're coming under, with Home Secretary Suella Braverman having branded the event a, quote, hate march. However, not every Tory minister is happy with that kind of language. This was Justice Minister Alex Chalk on Radio 4's Today programme.
Does the government want those marches banned?
Well, ultimately, it's a matter for the police, and the police came out yesterday, and they, of course, have to weigh up a number of competing considerations. Of course, there's the right to protest, which is important, but also concerns about public safety. Now, they have been very clear that having weighed all that up, their strong request is that these marches don't take place, and we support the police in that. We do think this is an incredibly important time in our calendar.
So you don't want these marches to take place, you as a government, and of course the Home Secretary has called them hate marches, you want them to be banned?
Leaving aside that wording for a second, we want the recommendation of the police.
That is wording that comes from the government, isn't it, if it comes from the Home Secretary?
We want the recommendation of the police to be followed. We think that it's wise advice. We think it takes account of all the competing considerations and that it should be followed.
Are they hate marches?
Look, I mean, there is no doubt there are elements on these marches that I'm afraid are espousing hate, whether it's from the river to the sea. But, equally, there will be those people who are there expressing their anguish at some of the untold suffering. Now, the concern must be whether those people who have the perfectly legitimate intentions and concerns are directly or indirectly supporting those people who are espousing hate.
That's
the
combination. If the Home Secretary calls them hate marches, and you very clearly don't call them hate marches. You say there are some who are hateful there, but others perfectly legitimate. That seems to be more than confusion at the heart of government.
No, it's not confusion. I think that's it's an issue of semantics.
Listeners, viewers, it is not an issue of semantics, anything but. Suella Braverman is saying this is a hate march. The people on it are hateful. Mr. Chalk is saying that actually some people have quote-unquote legitimate concerns. Something can't be both legitimate and hateful at the same time, one would imagine, unless you were calling for, some kind of a revolution. While Alex Chalk tried to moderate the rhetoric around the march, the Home Secretary chose instead to ramp it up. In response to the statement from the Metropolitan Police, she said this: I welcome this statement from the Met Police. The hate marchers need to understand that decent British people have had enough of these displays of thuggish intimidation and extremism. A thuggish intimidation and extremism. I'd like to see the evidence of that. Despite the advice from the police, the march's organisers are not backing down. Speaking on Radio 4, director of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, Ben Jamal, said this:
I understand the march is going to go ahead.
Yes, that's our intention. We do meet. We've been organising marches for some years, but in the last few weeks we've organised a number of demonstrations attended by hundreds of thousands. I think in total more than 1 million people have attended the demonstrations. We regularly meet with the police to ensure public safety in organising those. We met with them today. It is true that at that meeting they asked us, and they said, we're not telling you to do this, we're asking, would you consider postponing for a week? We made clear why we didn't think that was necessary. It is not true that they said to us that it was inappropriate to be demonstrating this weekend. And although they've made reference in their statement to breakaway groups that they think may cause disruption, they gave us no evidence for why they think that risk is increased any more than on the previous marches. And they affirmed to us their view, which they've repeated in their statement, that the marches have been largely overwhelmingly peaceful. I think across about 6 or 7 marches, there have been about 60 arrests made. So we don't understand the rationale for why it could not be managed appropriately.
Do you doubt them then when they say that? Do you doubt that they are relying on their evidence that they have gathered intelligence to make that assessment?
We asked them for details of that, and they weren't able to provide. They made reference to concerns about that previously. But look, the police have been putting conditions on these marches, we think unnecessarily, but conditions that make someone liable for arrest if they leave the route of the march. Across all of the marches, they've not had to employ those conditions. Nobody has been arrested for leaving the route of the march. So we're not quite sure what the difference would be. What we are conscious of, James, is that the police have been put under considerable political pressure by the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary with the comments they have been making. And it is difficult to see that the request from the police is not linked to that.
So at the moment, the march will be going ahead this Saturday, departing at noon from Marble Arch. Protesters will make their way from there to the US Embassy, well away from any activities around the cenotaph marking Armistice Day. I should say that the US Embassy is in 9 Elms. It's on a location very far away from Westminster. Not very far away, but it's south of the river. I mean, that should give you some idea of the distance between the two spots. But of course, Suella Braverman knows this. That's a point that fellow Tory Baroness Saida Warsi made on Sky News.
Do you have concerns about the protests, and should the police be taking a heavier approach to them?
I think there are some things we need to say. Israel is not Netanyahu. The Palestinian people are not Hamas. And the protesters on the streets of London are neither protesting for Hamas nor are they hate marchers. I think this really clunky way of trying to kind of put everybody together into these groups and then set up these tribal rivalries is something that the government's got to stop doing. I've spent the last 48 hours talking to the organisers of the protest. I've spoken to people within the military. I've spoken to people within the Met to see where this is all going to eventually.
What do you make of Suella Braverman? She told our correspondent Ali Fortescue anyone who vandalises the cenotaph on a protest should be jailed faster than their feet can touch the ground.
Sophie, as somebody whose grandfathers both served in the British Indian Army, who served in the wars, somebody whose great uncle was taken prisoner of war, somebody who still has family serving in our British Armed Forces, there is nobody like my family who understands the value of the sacrifices that were made and the value of our armed forces and the value of the cenotaph. And that's why what disgusts me is that these protests had been planned for weeks. They were in discussions with the Met Police for weeks. The route was well away from the cenotaph for weeks. And yet last week, the Home Secretary decided to embolden and make this a political issue, to embolden the far right, to make this a political issue, knowing full well, and she'd been briefed by the Met, of what the route of the march was going to be and the fact that they didn't have concerns at this stage. She has now made this a live political issue.
Why do you think she's done that?
Because that's the way she operates, right? She fights culture wars. She doesn't fix things.
Well done, Baroness Warsi. You have summed up Suella Braverman's modus operandi there in one sentence. She doesn't fix things. And indeed, the Conservatives, really, for most of the last 13 years. So rare and refreshing, by the way, I have to say, to hear a Conservative, a senior Conservative, actually talking a modicum of sense. It is very, very rare and very, very welcome. Warsi went on to give this assessment of Braverman.
I think she's dangerous and she's divisive. If you look at her rhetoric, it is always about pitching A against B. I've said this before. We have now, sadly, some of my colleagues in government who project as patriots, but they are indeed arsonists. They set this country alight. They pit community against community. They create these fires, and that is not the job of a government. The job of a government is to keep us all safe, and you do that by creating a sense of ease, not by fighting culture wars. So the question for us now is, and when I've been speaking to the protesters, the question for them now is, if we postpone, and they were in discussions with the Met on this, what happens when formal organizations step away from an organized march and we end up with informal groups, of which many have made arrangements to travel down here. So there's no proper policing, there's no proper management, there's no formal umbrella bodies. Do we create a more difficult situation on Saturday than if we continued with a formal march? So my advice to them has been, if you can postpone in a way which effectively means the police can police any fringe groups that may then fill that vacuum, that would be a good approach to take. But what we don't want to do is formal organisations to step back and make the job of the Met Police far harder, and all because the Home Secretary decided to make this a political issue and fight yet another culture war, a war that she didn't need to fight.
Wow. Wow. If only Keir Starmer could drop heat like that. And I'm not just saying that because, why are you blaming Labour, having a go at Labour when the Tories have done something wrong? Absolutely correct. But look, you just saw 3 minutes of an interview there. Incredible how much stuff she condensed into it, right? Incredible. She referred to the front bench, the government, which she's in the same party as arsonists. Incredible. And then she says quite explicitly, and I haven't heard this really made yet at sort of elite level in broadcast or in print. She's saying that the Home Secretary, by the way, the Home Secretary is really at the top of the Metropolitan Police Service. The chief of the Metropolitan Police Service has to answer to the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary is the person who is maximizing the chances of a public order situation. Mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. It's like the health secretary releasing a bioweapon into the ether. Okay, it's like the transport secretary blowing up a rail line. This is the absolute opposite of what you'd be expecting from somebody in that position. It's important to say it's not just Tory baronesses who support the Palestinian cause, however. These familiar left-wing faces are also turning out for Saturday's march.
Hello, I'm Mick Lynch from the RMT. I'll be marching on Saturday and speaking to the demonstration for peace in Palestine.
Hi, I'm Matt Rack from the FBU. We'll be marching on Saturday, calling for a ceasefire.
Hi, I'm Daniel Kebedy. I'm from the NEU, and I will also be marching on Saturday, calling for a ceasefire and peace in the Middle East.
Moya, I know you're planning to be there on Saturday. Why is it important that people demonstrate in support of Palestine in London this weekend?
I will indeed be there on Saturday, and I've been there every single Saturday there's been a march or a rally thus far, because I know what Mick Lynch knows, what Saida Warsi knows, what every other group that will gather in London and across Britain knows, that supporting the plight of Palestinians goes beyond tawdry left or right politics or culture wars, and it goes right back to the basics of what does it mean to be human? What do we want it to mean to live on this planet? With, for me and many others, that is about recognizing the humanity of others and their right to dignity, their right to equality, and their right to live lives free of oppression. And I think that's why you've seen such a large, cross-section of society turn up to these protests. I've been on many marches for my sins. I've been on many, many marches since I first started protesting. And these are some of the biggest that I've ever seen. I didn't go on the Iraq war marches because my mother didn't bust me down, sadly, like other parents did. But I've been on, a real smorgasbord of protests. And I turned up also to the Brexit protests, the ones that were pro-Brexit, to see what they're about. I turned up to, the statue defender protests because I want to see what these gatherings are like from, all across the political spectrum. And these marches have been some of the biggest and some of the most peaceful and some of the most harmonious that I've ever seen. And that's not to say that protest is only legitimate if it's peaceful. I don't believe that. And I also, objected to the bit of Baroness Warsi's when she was like, I would advise them to postpone. Why should we postpone? Why should we postpone this? These marches have brought together huge swathes of people because they understand what they're really about, which is standing in solidarity with an oppressed population that is currently under a campaign of ethnic cleansing. I'm going to call that ethnic cleansing, a genocidal campaign, and standing up and saying, not in my name. And, one of the key points about this is, and I don't think we've mentioned this yet, is these objections, these fabricated objections that people like Suella Braverman are making, and that the police are underlining by even saying perhaps it's not appropriate to march for a ceasefire on a day literally named for ceasefire is that nothing is actually even happening on Armistice Day on the 11th of November. First of all, Remembrance Day, the 12th, that is always when any sort of events, parades are planned. That's when the cenotaph will be filled with veterans. That's when all the wreaths will be laid. And even if it was, I would still say, there should be marches planned because I can't think of anything more appropriate. What happens on Armistice Day is a 2-minute silence at 11 a.m. We're not even starting this march until 12:45 a.m. And even then, I would think it would be incredibly powerful to see what will hopefully be about 1 million people walking through from High to US Embassy, nowhere near central London in the Cenotaph area, by the way. But I think it would be incredibly powerful to see 1 million people walk through in complete silence, remembering all the victims of conflicts past and conflicts present, and the marching in the name of the Palestinians. I cannot think of a more appropriate thing to do than that.
You used the word genocide and ethnic cleansing there, Moya. There was an IDF source over the weekend that said 20,000 people had died in Gaza, 20,000. Now, this is a territory with a population of 2.2 million. So you're therefore guessing to 1% of the entire population. If that source is correct, they of course may be wrong. Hamas is saying 10,000. 1% of the entire population being killed in a month. I mean, that is a serious number, isn't it? And I think when people use the word genocide or ethnic cleansing, the rebuttal is, oh, well, people are just trivializing these words. They're just saying things. They don't mean them. They don't know what they mean. When you say genocide, ethnic cleansing, let's drill down into that just for a moment. Why are you choosing those words?
I'm choosing those words because we are seeing, I think, at the last count, it was something like 47 entire families that are wiped out. And we're not just seeing, the deaths of lots of people en masse, which would be very tragic on its own. We are seeing the future of this population of people, the Palestinian people, wiped out for good. We are seeing children who are almost half of the population of Gaza and make up a significant amount of casualties being wiped out. Those are children who would be carrying on that group of people. They are carrying on that ethnic line. If you kill the children, you kill the future of a demographic. And just to give context to that figure of 10,000 plus killed in a month, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine launched in February 2022, horrific levels of casualties. By September 2023, that is more than a year later, 9,000 people have been killed. And I don't say that to, minimize what those casualties mean, what those individual 9,000 lives, people with hopes, dreams, loved ones, their deaths, their loss from the world means, but instead to contextualize what it means that 10,000 Palestinians out of a population of 2.2 million in the Gaza Strip have been killed in under a month. Millions more have been displaced. There is no other word for it than genocide and ethnic cleansing. I've read, unfortunately, quite a bit about genocides past, Rwanda in a particular one. And the scale of deaths in Rwanda, I think, was higher than is happening now. But it's the exact same thing. You displace a population, you clear them out, and you kill the people who won't leave. Who is left? Who is left of that population? The only word for it is genocide and ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, there's still a couple of 100,000 people in North Gaza, which is where Israel is saying, you have to leave. And let's say it's 10,000 people have died. What's the exchange rate at which point the Israelis will stop? 100,000? 200,000? That isn't a question that's being asked by the international community or our leaders, which frankly is terrifying. We do, however, have a quick bit of news. This weekend's pro-Palestine march is set to go ahead. Met Commissioner Mark Rowley has confirmed. Big news. Rowley added, if over the next few days intelligence evolves further and we get to such a high threshold, it's only been done once in a decade, where we need to say to the Home Secretary, we need to ban the march element, then of course we will do. But that's a last resort we haven't reached.